The morning sun cast long shadows across the busy terminal at Chicago O'Hare International Airport. Travelers hurried past with rolling suitcases, coffee cups in hand, checking their phones for gate numbers and departure times. Among them walked David Johnson, a man in his early 40s with graying temples and kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. David looked like any other business traveler that Tuesday morning. He wore comfortable jeans, a navy blue polo shirt, and well-worn sneakers. His black leather messenger bag hung across his shoulder, and he carried a small rolling carry-on. Nothing about his appearance suggested he held one of the most important jobs in aviation safety. For the past 15 years, David had worked as a senior inspector for the Federal Aviation Administration. His job took him all over the country and around the world, checking that airlines followed safety rules and regulations. Today's trip to Denver was supposed to be routine, but it was also secret. The airline he was flying with didn't know he was coming. These surprise visits were crucial to his work. When airlines knew an inspector was coming, they made sure everything looked perfect. But real safety meant things had to be right all the time, not just when someone was watching. That's why David often traveled without identifying himself as an FAA official. His passport told the story of his extensive travel. The dark blue booklet was well used, with pages filled with stamps from countries across 6 continents. There were stamps from Germany, where he'd inspected maintenance facilities, from Japan, where he'd reviewed pilot training programs, and from Brazil, where he'd investigated safety protocols. Each stamp represented another piece of his mission to keep air travel safe for millions of passengers. David had chosen his flight carefully. He'd booked a first-class seat on Flight 447 to Denver, not because he wanted luxury, but because it gave him a better view of how the airline treated its premium customers. Safety issues could appear anywhere, from the boarding process to the in-flight service. As he walked through Terminal B, David noticed the usual airport rush. Families gathered around departure boards, business travelers typed frantically on laptops, and gate agents prepared for another busy day of flights. He'd seen this scene thousands of times, but he never stopped paying attention to the details. Gate B-17 came into view, and David could see passengers already gathering for the 10:30 a.m. departure. The gate area buzzed with quiet conversation and the occasional announcement over the intercom. He checked his watch and saw he had plenty of time before boarding would begin. Behind the counter at Gate B-17 stood Lisa Patterson, a gate agent who'd been working for the airline for 3 years. At 26 years old, she took pride in her job and usually enjoyed helping passengers. She'd been trained in customer service and had attended the company's diversity workshops just 6 months earlier. Lisa was having a typical morning, checking in passengers and answering questions about connections and baggage. She'd already handled 24 passengers without any problems, but as she looked up and saw David approaching her counter, something shifted in her demeanor. Maybe it was the stress of the morning rush, or perhaps unconscious thoughts she didn't even realize she was having. Whatever the reason, Lisa found herself studying David more carefully than she had other passengers. His casual clothes seemed out of place for someone holding a first-class boarding pass. His worn messenger bag didn't look expensive enough. Something just didn't feel right to her. David reached the counter and smiled politely. "Good morning. I'm checking in for Flight 447 to Denver." He handed over his boarding pass and passport with the same routine gesture he'd made hundreds of times before. The boarding pass clearly showed Seat 3A first class. His passport, despite its worn appearance, was perfectly valid and wouldn't expire for another 4 years. Lisa took the documents but immediately began examining them with unusual intensity. She flipped through pages of David's passport, studying stamps and dates with a scrutiny she rarely applied to other passengers' documents. "Is there a problem?" David asked, maintaining his friendly tone despite noticing her suspicious behavior. "Just doing my job," Lisa replied curtly, continuing to examine his passport. She held it up to the light as if checking for signs of forgery. The more she looked, the more convinced she became that something was wrong. Other passengers in line began to notice the delay. A businessman behind David checked his watch impatiently. A family with young children shifted restlessly as their kids grew tired of waiting. David remained calm. In his years of travel, he'd encountered all kinds of situations. He knew that showing frustration or anger would only make things worse. His training as an investigator had taught him to observe and document rather than react emotionally. But inside, He felt the familiar sting of judgment based on appearance rather than facts. He'd experienced this before, though usually not so openly. The irony wasn't lost on him that someone whose job was to ensure fair and safe treatment of all passengers was being treated unfairly himself. Lisa continued her examination, now focusing on the stamps in David's passport. "You travel internationally a lot," she said, making it sound like an accusation rather than an observation. "Yes, I do." "Business travel?" David replied simply. "What kind of business?" Lisa pressed, though checking someone's profession wasn't part of her usual routine. David paused. He couldn't reveal his true job without potentially compromising his investigation. "Consulting work," he said, which was technically true. Lisa's frown deepened. In her mind, this casual-dressed man with his worn bag and vague answers about consulting work didn't match her idea of someone who could afford first-class international travel. The morning was about to take a turn that would change both of their lives forever. David stood patiently at the counter, unaware that his routine flight was about to become anything but routine. Lisa held his passport in her hands, her suspicions growing stronger by the minute. Behind them, the gate area filled with more passengers. Families found seats, business travelers worked on laptops, and everyone waited for boarding to begin. None of them knew they were about to witness an incident that would expose hard truths about assumptions, prejudice, and the power of staying professional under pressure. The stage was set for a confrontation that would reveal how quickly a normal day could turn extraordinary, and how the most important lessons sometimes come from the most unexpected places. Lisa's hands trembled slightly as she continued examining David's passport. What had started as routine suspicion was now growing into full conviction that something was seriously wrong. She'd never seen so many international stamps in one passport, and the idea that this casually dressed man could afford first-class travel bothered her more than she cared to admit. "I need to call my supervisor," Lisa announced loudly enough for nearby passengers to hear. David raised an eyebrow but remained calm. "Is there a specific issue with my documents?" "Just being thorough," Lisa replied, though her tone suggested otherwise. She picked up the phone at her desk and spoke in hushed tones to someone on the other end. The line behind David was growing longer, and passengers were beginning to show signs of impatience. A woman with 2 small children kept checking her watch, while a businessman tapped his foot rhythmically on the carpet. The energy at Gate B-17 was shifting from typical pre-flight bustle to uncomfortable tension. Within minutes, Tom Rodriguez, the gate supervisor, appeared at the counter. Tom had been working at the airport for 8 years and had seen his share of difficult situations. He was generally known for his fair approach to problems, but he also trusted his staff's judgment. "What's the situation?" Tom asked Lisa quietly. Lisa leaned in and whispered something in Tom's ear, gesturing toward David's passport. From their body language, it was clear she was expressing serious concerns about the validity of his documents. Tom looked at David, then at the passport Lisa handed him. Like Lisa, he began examining it with unusual care, flipping through pages and holding it up to the light. "Sir, we're just going to need a few more minutes to verify your documentation," Tom said to David. "I understand you have procedures to follow," David replied diplomatically, "but I'm curious about what specifically has raised concerns. I've been flying internationally for many years without any issues." Tom didn't answer directly. Instead, he continued his examination while other passengers openly stared at the scene unfolding at the counter. Some had pulled out their phones, though whether to check the time or record the incident wasn't clear. "Step aside, please," Lisa instructed David, pointing to a small area next to the counter. "We need to clear the line while we resolve this." David moved as requested, but the instruction felt like being singled out for punishment. Now he stood off to the side while other passengers processed through the line normally, their documents receiving only cursory glances. Lisa had produced a magnifying glass from somewhere behind the counter and was examining David's passport with the intensity of a detective investigating a major crime. She scrutinized every stamp, every page, every detail as if expecting to find obvious signs of forgery. "This stamp from Germany looks unusual," she said to Tom, though not quietly enough to prevent David from hearing. David knew the stamp she was referring to. He'd gotten it 6 months earlier during an inspection of Lufthansa's maintenance facility in Frankfurt. It was completely legitimate, issued by German immigration officials just like thousands of others every day. I can explain any of the stamps if you'd like, David offered. We don't need explanations, Lisa replied sharply. We need verification. The magnifying glass examination continued for several more minutes. Lisa pointed out various elements of different stamps, questioning their authenticity with Tom. To anyone watching, it looked like they'd discovered a master criminal trying to use fraudulent documents. David noticed that passengers in line were now openly staring and whispering among themselves. He could hear fragments of conversations. What did he do? Must be something serious. They never check passports this carefully. A teenage girl with her family actually raised her phone and appeared to be recording video of the scene. David made mental notes of everything happening, a habit from his investigative work, but he never imagined he'd need to document discrimination against himself. The number of stamps in this passport is suspicious, Lisa declared, speaking loudly enough for everyone in the gate area to hear. Most people don't travel this much internationally. David almost laughed at the irony. His extensive travel was actually proof of his legitimate work, not evidence of wrongdoing. But he maintained his composure. I travel frequently for business, he said simply. What kind of business requires this much international travel? Tom asked, now joining the interrogation. David paused. He still couldn't reveal his true occupation without compromising his investigation. Consulting work in various countries, he said. Lisa and Tom exchanged glances that suggested they found his answer insufficient. In their minds, his vague response only confirmed their suspicions. We're going to need to make some calls, Tom announced. This might take a while. David checked his watch. Boarding was supposed to begin in 20 minutes. How long do you expect this process to take? As long as necessary, Lisa replied with what seemed like satisfaction. The interrogation was attracting more attention. Passengers at nearby gates were beginning to notice the commotion at gate B-17. Some walked closer to get a better view of what was happening. David realized he was becoming a spectacle. He stood off to the side, well-dressed professional reduced to suspicious character in the eyes of everyone watching. The irony was bitter. A man whose job was to ensure fair treatment of passengers was being treated unfairly himself. Tom had now moved to a computer terminal and was typing something, presumably running checks on David's information. Lisa continued holding the passport as if it were evidence in a criminal case. Everything all right over there? Called out a passenger from the regular boarding line. Just routine verification, Tom replied, though nothing about the situation looked routine. David watched other passengers process through the line smoothly. Their passports received quick glances, their boarding passes were scanned efficiently, and they were welcomed aboard with smiles. The contrast with his own treatment was stark and obvious. After what felt like an eternity but was actually only 15 minutes, Tom returned from the computer. We're going to need to call airport security, he announced. David's eyebrows rose. Security? For what purpose? We have concerns about your documentation and your responses to our questions, Lisa said, clearly pleased with this development. David felt his calm beginning to crack slightly. Being subjected to security screening over completely legitimate documents was beyond reasonable procedure, but he forced himself to remain professional. I'd like to speak with a manager about this situation, he said firmly but politely. Tom is the supervisor on duty, Lisa replied, and we've made our decision. As if on cue, 2 airport security officers appeared at the gate. David recognized the type, serious professionals who dealt with real security threats daily. He wondered what Lisa and Tom had told them to get them to respond. The situation had escalated far beyond what anyone could have predicted when David first approached the counter with his boarding pass and passport. What started as routine travel was becoming a public humiliation, and David knew the worst was yet to come. The 2 security officers approached gate B-17 with the serious expressions of professionals responding to a potential threat. Officer Martinez, a veteran with 12 years of airport security experience, and Officer Thompson, newer but well-trained, had been told by dispatch that gate agents had concerns about suspicious documentation and an uncooperative passenger. David watched them approach, noting their body language and preparation. In his years of aviation work, he'd collaborated with airport security countless times on legitimate investigations. Now he was on the other side of their attention, and it felt surreal. What's the situation here? Officer Martinez asked Tom, who stepped forward to explain. This passenger presented a passport that we have concerns about, Tom began, gesturing toward David. The document shows excessive international travel, and the passenger has been evasive about his reasons for travel. David listened to Tom's description with growing disbelief. Everything Tom described as suspicious was actually evidence of legitimate professional travel. The irony would have been amusing if it weren't happening to him. Officer Thompson approached David. "Sir, may I see your identification?" David handed over his passport willingly. Thompson examined it with the trained eye of someone who'd seen thousands of travel documents. Unlike Lisa's dramatic magnifying glass examination, Thompson's review was professional and efficient. "The passport appears to be in order," Thompson said to his partner. Lisa's face flushed. She'd been so certain something was wrong, and now even security couldn't find the obvious problems she'd spotted. "Look more carefully at the stamps," Lisa insisted, moving closer to point out specific pages. "There are too many of them, and some look questionable." Officer Martinez took the passport and examined the stamps Lisa was highlighting. David recognized the look on Martinez's face, the expression of someone trying to understand what problem they were supposed to be seeing. "Ma'am, I'm not seeing anything irregular about these stamps," Martinez said diplomatically. Lisa's frustration was becoming visible. She'd called security with such confidence, and now they weren't backing up her concerns. "Maybe we need someone with more experience in document verification," she suggested. David had remained silent during this exchange, but now he spoke up. "Officers, I'm happy to answer any questions about my travel history. I understand you're doing your job." His calm professional demeanor contrasted sharply with Lisa's agitated state. The security officers noticed the difference. "Sir, where are you traveling today?" Officer Thompson asked. "Denver for business," David replied. "What type of business?" David hesitated again. "Consulting work." Officer Martinez sensed the tension but couldn't identify any legitimate security concern. David's documents were valid, his behavior was cooperative, and his explanations, while brief, weren't suspicious. "I think we can resolve this quickly," Martinez said to the group. But Lisa wasn't ready to give up. She stepped forward, reaching for David's passport to point out another stamp she wanted the officers to examine more closely. What happened next would change everything. As Lisa reached across the counter space, her high heel caught on a small carpet edge near the counter. She stumbled slightly and David's passport, which she'd been holding, flew from her hand. The passport hit the floor with a soft thud, landing open with pages scattered. "Oh no," Lisa exclaimed, rushing to pick it up, but as she bent down quickly, her heel came down directly on the edge of the open passport. There was a soft tearing sound that made everyone freeze. David watched in horror as Lisa's heel caught 2 pages of his passport, including one containing crucial visa stamps from recent business trips. The pages tore partially, leaving them damaged and barely hanging on. "I'm so sorry," Lisa said, but her tone lacked genuine remorse. "It was an accident." David knelt down to examine his damaged passport. The torn pages included stamps he needed for upcoming international inspections. More importantly, the damage to an official government document was a serious matter. "This is a federal document," David said quietly, his voice tightly controlled. Officer Martinez immediately understood the gravity of the situation. Damage to a passport, whether accidental or intentional, was a significant issue. "Ma'am, I need you to step back," Martinez instructed Lisa. But Lisa wasn't finished. Perhaps feeling cornered by the situation, she made a decision that would seal her fate. "Actually, I don't think this passport should be considered valid anymore," she announced. "It's been damaged and could be compromised." David stared at her in disbelief. She had damaged his passport and was now using that damage as justification to deny him boarding. "You damaged the document yourself," David said, his professional calm finally showing strain. "It was an accident," Lisa insisted, "but now the document's integrity is questionable. I can't allow boarding with damaged documentation." Tom, who had been watching this unfold, sensed the situation spiraling beyond his control. "Lisa, maybe we should—" "No," Lisa cut him off. "Security protocol is clear about damaged documents." Officer Thompson looked at his partner with concern. They both knew there was no security protocol that covered self-inflicted damage to documents by airline personnel. Sir, when did you last use this passport for internating? On all travel? Martinez asked David. 2 weeks ago, returning from Germany, David replied, and it was fine then? Perfect condition. Martinez looked at the damaged passport, then at Lisa, then back at David. The sequence of events was becoming clear, and it wasn't reflecting well on the airline staff. Ma'am, Martinez addressed Lisa. Did you see what caused the damage to this document? Lisa's face reddened. Like I said, it was an accident. I was trying to examine it more closely when it fell. But now you're saying the damage makes it invalid. Yes, safety first. David finally reached his breaking point. This is discrimination, he said clearly, loudly enough for the growing crowd of onlookers to hear. Sir, please remain calm, Officer Thompson said. I am remaining calm, David replied, but I'm also documenting discrimination and destruction of federal property. Lisa's eyes widened. Destruction? It was an accident. An accident that conveniently allows you to deny boarding to someone whose appearance you've been suspicious of since I first approached this counter. Several passengers had pulled out their phones and were now clearly recording the confrontation. David noticed but continued speaking. I've been cooperative, my documents are legitimate. And now you've physically damaged my passport and are using that damage to justify continued discrimination. Tom finally stepped in. Let's all take a breath here, but it was too late. The situation had crossed a line from suspicious behavior into clear discrimination and property damage. David pulled out his own phone and began recording. I'm documenting this incident for my report, he announced. What report? Lisa demanded. David looked at her calmly. The report I'll be filing about this airline's treatment of passengers and its gate agents' conduct. The word report seemed to rattle both Lisa and Tom. Official reports meant investigations, and investigations meant trouble. Officer Martinez had seen enough. I think we need to call a supervisor, he told Tom. As if the situation couldn't get any more tense, Lisa made one final, fateful decision. Actually, I think this passenger has become aggressive and threatening. I want him removed from the gate area. David stood perfectly still, his voice calm and clear. Officers, I haven't raised my voice, made any threats, or done anything aggressive. I've simply identified discrimination and property damage. The security officers looked at each other. They'd been watching the entire interaction, and David's behavior had been notably calm and professional throughout. But Lisa had made her accusation, and now the situation was about to explode beyond anyone's control. Officer Martinez studied David's calm demeanor and contrasted it with Lisa's increasingly agitated behavior. In 12 years of airport security work, he'd developed a keen sense for reading people and situations. Something about this entire incident felt wrong. Ma'am, Martinez addressed Lisa. Can you describe specifically what aggressive behavior you observed? Lisa faltered. Well, he raised his voice and was making accusations. I've been standing here the entire time, Officer Thompson interjected. At no point did this gentleman raise his voice or display aggressive behavior. David remained motionless, letting the officers draw their own conclusions. His years of professional training had taught him that sometimes the best action was no action at all. Tom, the supervisor, was beginning to realize the situation had gone too far. He'd trusted Lisa's judgment initially, but now he was watching her make claims that contradicted what everyone had witnessed. Maybe we should just... Tom started to suggest, but his words were cut off by a new voice. Inspector Johnson, is there a problem here? Everyone turned toward the voice. Approaching the gate was Captain Williams, the head of airport security, a man David had worked with on several joint investigations over the past 5 years. David's heart sank. His cover was about to be blown in the most public way possible. Lisa's face showed confusion. Inspector Johnson? Who's Inspector Johnson? Captain Williams strode up to the group, his presence immediately commanding respect from his officers and attention from everyone in the gate area. Inspector Johnson, Williams said, extending his hand to David. I didn't know you were flying through O'Hare today. David shook Williams's hand reluctantly. There was no hiding his identity now. Actually, Captain, I was conducting an undercover compliance review, David said quietly. The words hit the gate area like a bomb. Lisa's face went white. Undercover? Compliance review? Tom took a step backward, the implications beginning to sink in. Inspector Johnson works for the Federal Aviation Administration, Captain Williams announced to the group. He's one of our most experienced aviation safety investigators. Officer Martinez looked at David with new understanding. Sir, why didn't you identify yourself earlier? Because revealing my identity would have compromised the investigation, David explained. I needed to experience how this airline treats passengers without the special consideration they might show to a federal inspector. Lisa was staring at David as if seeing him for the first time. You're really an FAA inspector? Senior Inspector David Johnson, 15 years with the agency, Captain Williams confirmed. He's investigated aviation incidents across 6 continents and has been instrumental in developing current safety protocols. Tom was now visibly sweating. Inspector Johnson, we didn't know. If we had known, that's exactly the point, David interrupted gently. You shouldn't need to know my profession to treat me with basic respect and follow proper procedures. The crowd of onlookers had grown larger, and many were still recording with their phones. David noticed airline passengers, airport staff, and even some crew members from other gates had gathered to watch the unfolding drama. Captain Williams surveyed the scene. Can someone explain what happened here? Officer Martinez stepped forward. Sir, the gate agent called us because she claimed this gentleman's passport was suspicious and that he was being uncooperative. And the passport? Williams asked. Completely legitimate. Extensive international stamps, all proper. Just what you'd expect from someone who travels internationally for work. Williams looked at the passport David held, noting the torn pages. What happened to cause this damage? David looked at Lisa, giving her a chance to explain. Lisa's voice was barely a whisper. It fell, and my heel caught it when I tried to pick it up. You dropped a passenger's federal document and then damaged it? Williams asked. It was an accident. And after damaging it, what did you do? Tom stepped in. She declared the passport invalid due to the damage and refused to allow boarding. Captain Williams shook his head slowly. So you damaged a federal document, and then used that damage to justify denying service to the person whose document you damaged. The absurdity of the situation was now clear to everyone present. Furthermore, Officer Thompson added, she then claimed Inspector Johnson was being aggressive and requested his removal from the gate area. Were you being aggressive, Inspector? Williams asked David. I remained calm throughout the entire interaction. I simply identified what was happening as discrimination and stated that I would be documenting the incident. Williams turned to his officers. Did you witness any aggressive behavior? None whatsoever, both officers replied simultaneously. In fact, Martinez added, Inspector Johnson's behavior was notably professional throughout what I would consider a very trying situation. A new voice joined the conversation. What's happening here? Regional Manager Patricia Hayes had arrived at the gate, having been summoned by airport operations when they learned an FAA inspector was involved in an incident. Captain Williams quickly briefed her on the situation while David watched Lisa's face grow paler with each detail. Inspector Johnson, Manager Hayes said, please accept our sincere apologies. This should never have happened. Ms. Hayes, David replied. This incident reveals serious training gaps in your organization. Your gate agent made assumptions based on appearance, mishandled federal documents, and then made false accusations to cover her mistakes. Hayes nodded gravely. We will absolutely investigate this fully and take appropriate action. I'll need copies of all security footage, David said, and I'll be filing a complete report with both the FAA and your corporate headquarters. Lisa finally found her voice. Inspector Johnson, I made a mistake. I was just being careful about security. David looked at her with professional detachment. Ms. Patterson, being careful about security means following established procedures and treating all passengers with equal respect. What happened here was not security consciousness, it was discrimination based on assumptions. But I didn't mean... Intent doesn't change impact, David interrupted. Your actions caused discrimination, property damage, and false accusations. Those are the facts that matter. Manager Hayes was taking notes rapidly. Inspector Johnson, how can we make this right? The damage is already done to my passport and my investigation. But you can ensure this doesn't happen to other passengers by addressing the training issues and policy gaps this incident has revealed. Tom, who had been silent, finally spoke up. Inspector, I supported my employees' actions. I bear responsibility too, David nodded. That's correct. Supervisory oversight failed here as well. Captain Williams looked around the gate area, noting the crowd and the phone still recording. This incident is going to have significant visibility. As it should, David lied. Airport discrimination incidents need to be taken seriously, regardless of who they happen to. Hayes was clearly calculating the potential impact. An FAA inspector discriminated against and having his federal documents damaged by airline personnel would make headlines and trigger multiple investigations. Inspector Johnson, she said, what are your immediate needs? New passport? Alternative travel arrangements? David checked his watch. His original flight was beginning to board, but he was no longer traveling undercover. I'll need expedited passport replacement and will continue to Denver on this flight if possible. My investigation there will proceed, though obviously no longer undercover. Of course, whatever you need. As the immediate crisis management began, David reflected on how quickly the situation had changed. One moment he was being treated as a suspicious character. The next he was being offered every possible accommodation. But the lesson was clear. Respect and proper treatment shouldn't depend on someone's job title or status. Every passenger deserved what he was only now receiving after his identity was revealed. The tables had turned completely, but the real reckoning was just beginning. 48 hours after the incident at Gate B-17, David Johnson sat in his Chicago office reviewing the mountain of documentation he'd compiled. Security footage, witness statements, phone recordings, and his own detailed notes painted a clear picture of systematic problems that went far beyond one gate agent's poor judgment. The State Department had expedited his passport replacement in record time, understanding the critical nature of his upcoming international inspections, but the damaged document sat on his desk as evidence of something much more serious than torn pages. His phone had been ringing constantly since news of the incident began spreading. Through aviation industry networks, reporters wanted interviews, civil rights organizations sought details, and airline executives requested meetings. But David's focus remained on what mattered most, ensuring this never happened to another passenger. The security footage told the complete story. Camera angles from multiple positions captured Lisa's suspicious behavior from the moment David approached the counter. Her excessive examination of his documents, and the clearly visible moment when her heel tore his passport pages. Most damaging of all, the audio picked up her comment to Tom about how someone like him shouldn't be flying first class. Regional Manager. Patricia Hayes had worked through the night reviewing the footage and conducting preliminary interviews. Her report to corporate headquarters was damning. The incident represented multiple policy violations, potential legal liability, and a public relations nightmare that was already gaining national attention. Lisa Patterson had been suspended immediately pending a full investigation. But as details emerged, suspension became termination. The evidence was overwhelming. Discriminatory treatment based on racial profiling, destruction of federal property, false accusations against a passenger, and violations of multiple company policies. Tom Rodriguez faced similar consequences. As a supervisor, his failure to intervene and his support of discriminatory actions made him equally responsible. His 8 years of employment ended with a termination letter citing failure to maintain professional standards and inadequate supervision of staff. But David knew that firing 2 employees, while necessary, wouldn't solve the systemic issues the incident had exposed. His detailed report to FAA headquarters recommended a comprehensive review of the airline's training programs, hiring practices, and incident response protocols. The airline's corporate response was swift and extensive. CEO Michael Thompson issued a public apology acknowledging the discrimination David had experienced. The company committed to implementing new training programs developed in consultation with civil rights organizations and diversity experts. Every gate agent, supervisor, and customer service representative would undergo mandatory bias recognition training. The curriculum would include scenarios based on David's experience, ensuring employees understood how unconscious assumptions could escalate into discrimination. New policies required multiple supervisor approval for any passenger document challenges, mandatory recording of discrimination complaints, and regular audits of passenger treatment across demographic groups. The airline also established a direct reporting hotline for discrimination incidents, bypassing local management to ensure corporate oversight. David's own investigation revealed troubling patterns. His analysis of complaint data showed that passengers of color were significantly more likely to face additional scrutiny during check-in and boarding processes. The incident at Gate B-17 wasn't an isolated event, but part of a broader pattern of unequal treatment. 3 weeks after the incident, David returned to O'Hare Airport for a follow-up inspection. This time he traveled in his official capacity, meeting with airport management and airline executives to review implemented changes. The transformation at Gate B-17 was visible immediately. New supervisor Jennifer Martinez, hired specifically for her experience in diversity and inclusion, had restructured the entire check-in process. Clear protocols now governed document examination, with specific criteria for when additional verification was warranted. "Inspector Johnson," Jennifer said as she showed him the new procedures, "we've completely redesigned our approach based on your recommendations. Every interaction is now guided by objective criteria rather than subjective judgment." David observed the new processes in action. Gate agents followed standardized protocols, treating all passengers with consistent respect regardless of appearance or perceived status. The changes were comprehensive and appeared genuine. But the real test came during David's interviews with passengers who had witnessed the original incident. Several had provided statements supporting his account, but he wanted to understand the broader impact. "That day changed how I think about what I see in airports," said businessman Robert Chen, who had been waiting in line behind David. "I realized I've probably witnessed discrimination before but didn't recognize it or speak up. Now I pay attention differently." The incident had sparked conversations far beyond aviation. Civil rights organizations used David's experience as a case study in how unconscious bias could escalate into overt discrimination. Training programs in multiple industries incorporated elements of his story. Legal consequences followed as well. The Department of Transportation launched an investigation into the airline's passenger treatment practices, ultimately resulting in a substantial fine and mandatory compliance monitoring. David's damaged passport had indeed been destruction of federal property, leading to additional penalties. 6 months later, David received an unexpected letter. It was from Lisa Patterson. "Inspector Johnson," the letter began, "I know I have no right to contact you, and I understand if you don't read this, but I need you to know that losing my job was the wake-up call I desperately needed. I've spent months in therapy trying to understand how my unconscious biases led me to treat you so terribly. I'm not writing to ask for forgiveness or to make excuses. I'm writing to thank you for handling that situation with such professionalism that it forced me to confront ugly truths about myself. I'm now volunteering with a local civil rights organization, sharing my story to help others recognize their own biases before they cause harm. I hope someday I can contribute to preventing incidents like ours from happening to other people. What I did to you was wrong, inexcusable, and I will regret it for the rest of my life. But I'm trying to make sure some good comes from my terrible mistake." David read the letter twice, then filed it with his case documentation. Accountability was important, but genuine change required people to confront their biases and commit to doing better. The industry changes continued expanding. Other airlines adopted similar bias recognition training after seeing the positive results from David's incident airline. The FAA incorporated discrimination prevention into safety inspector training, recognizing that fair treatment and safety oversight were fundamentally connected. A year after the incident, David was invited to speak at the International Aviation Safety Summit. His presentation, "When Bias Compromises Safety: Lessons from the Front Lines," drew a standing ovation from industry leaders worldwide. "Aviation safety depends on trust," David told the audience. "Passengers must trust that they'll be treated fairly regardless of their appearance, background, or perceived status. When that trust breaks down, it undermines everything we work to achieve in safety and service." The incident at Gate B-17 had become a turning point, not just for one airline, but for an entire industry's approach to passenger treatment. David's calm professionalism during discrimination had transformed a terrible experience into meaningful, lasting change. But perhaps the most important outcome was personal. David continued his inspection work with renewed understanding of how easily assumptions could override training and policies. His experience as a target of discrimination informed every investigation, making him a more effective advocate for fair treatment. The torn pages of his original passport remained in his office, framed alongside letters from passengers who had experienced improved treatment, thanks to the changes his incident had sparked. They served as a daily reminder that standing up to discrimination, even when it's difficult, could create ripples of positive change that extended far beyond the original incident. Sometimes the most important safety inspections happened when you least expected them, David reflected. And sometimes the most valuable lessons came from the most painful experiences, as long as you had the courage to turn them into opportunities for justice and change.